All right, beautiful day at Gray Whale Cove. I'm here with Tad Wagner in the background here. And we're just kind of getting set up and trying to figure out what to paint. So we're both looking at this spot right here. And what I'm thinking of doing is just kind of focusing on, you know, the breaking waves and the rocks in this area. In the past, I've included the sky as well. But if I do that, then the area that's most interesting to me right here is going to be kind of small. So I kind of want to zoom in on that. I've never done that before. All right, Tad, do you know what you're going to do here?
Not quite sure yet. Yeah, kind of scoping out a few ideas. I don't know, I tend to just kind of focus on these rocks down here, and I really like kind of the clouds against the sky, so I'm gonna try and maybe compress things a little bit.
Yeah, I've done that in the past where like I'll just take the mountain and I'll bring it down a little bit, and then also the horizon a little bit, so that'll bring the clouds into the picture as well.
Yeah.
And you know, so that's one of the advantages we have as painters, right? Just to be able to move things around.
Sure.
Today I am working on a stretch canvas. Actually, this is oil primed linen, and it's not an expensive canvas. I think it's made by Centurion. Anyway, it's a 20 by 20 inch canvas. And then my usual palette of colors. I do have some transparent yellow oxide, and then also some cerulean blue pure. So it'd be interesting to try this. As usual, I'm using Liquid Original as my medium and odorless mineral spirits. And I've mostly been using this number 8 natural bristle flat. So planning on using this. All right, so I've toned in burnt sienna and I'm sketching in burnt sienna, starting off with big shapes and then sort of refining those shapes. And I'm also including shadow shapes. Like this shape here is all going to be in shadow. So kind of indicating where the shadows are as well. One of the biggest challenges, you know, doing landscapes is to see beyond what the scene is and see it as simple shapes. Am I making sense, Tad?
I could barely hear you, but
oh, I'm just talking about breaking things down. The challenge of like breaking down a scene into simple shapes is so difficult when we're looking at, you know, a scene. You get caught up in that, and yet as a painter, we have to simplify and think in terms of shapes, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So you've got to see that abstract pattern within the scene. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That is our challenge.
It's tough.
Yeah. All right. So there's a rock out here. I think I'm going to move that a little bit to the left. Something like that. And there's another rock behind it. All right, so I'm going to start laying in some darks using ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna, thinning with liquid. And I'm using a number 6 natural bristle flat. There's actually quite a bit of wind picking up here. So I've set up my easel so that the wind is blowing kind of at a side angle, kind of blowing like this in line with my canvas so it doesn't, you know, blow it away. Definitely a challenge to continue squinting and looking at the scene. Another thing I do is I you know, paint without my glasses on, because that forces me to focus on shapes as opposed to things. All right, so there's some portions that are sort of in half light, which is kind of difficult to determine, you know, the color. I'm seeing a sort of greenish tone, and that'll be a decent, you know, starting color. And then I can adjust from there. And there's a bunch of light on the rocks in here. At this stage, just trying to, you know, create an interesting pattern of light and shadow. It's like the primary challenge. Okay, so there's kind of some rocks coming like this. a bunch of light on the rocks in here, but I can add that later. These are kind of half light as well. They appear to be a bit bluer in tone, so I'm adding some ultramarine, kind of making these like a mid-tone gray. A lot of these darks are going to need to be reinforced. It's kind of mid-tone gray down at the bottom of this one as well. I think right here I'm going to have like a breaking wave in this area right here. And try to get some interesting whitewater patterns too compositionally, because there's a lot going on to the left here. So it could seem out of balance unless I put something of interest over here. So we'll see how that goes. The scrub in is more or less finished, and you know, to be honest, I had my doubts about this composition. I actually think it's okay. The doubts I had were that I don't have a horizon, but yet I wanted to create a sense of depth, and so, you know, basically I'm cutting it off, you know, right about here. So how to create a sense of depth when you don't have a horizon? That's kind of tricky. But I put a few like waves out here. I'm also going to soften up the transition between this green and the blue, so that'll hopefully also help it, you know, seem like one plane receding into the distance. There's some interesting things happening brushwork wise, like this scrubbed in area here. I do like having that kind of energy and don't want to paint over all of that. But I think the next step is going to be to start reinforcing some of the darks. Let's get all up in Tad's business over here. I'm liking these patterns right here. So you just started putting those in right now. Are you just reinforcing the darks there on those shapes?
Reinforcing it, yeah. Kind of changed since I started, which I like it better now. So.
Well, one of the interesting things too is like when you put in, you know, a lot of times when you like reinforce the darks, then it makes the lights seem lighter, right?
Yeah, right.
So that's what I noticed as you started putting those in, like that orange started glowing more.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so at this point I am trying to kind of flesh this thing out without, you know, without ruining some of the elements that I think are working. So I'm just carefully working into some of these shapes and trying to be a little more specific with the color. I think this shadow shape here is actually a little bit too purple. It's kind of hard to see into the shadows, but there's a lot of yellow, a lot of warmth in the shadows just because there's reflected light off the whitewater into, you know, onto this cliff here. So I may experiment putting some yellow tones in here, but I still want to have, you know, I still want it to read as shadow. That's the challenge, you know. And so if you have warm light, you know, in the light portion, and, you know, warmth in the shadows, then am I still going to get a feeling of light? That's what I'm hoping for. Yeah, putting that white water in, that's like, that's where it comes to life. Oh. You know, you're putting on nice and thick too.
Yeah, trying to get it pretty thick.
You know, oftentimes you can, you know, duplicate some of the qualities of the water with the texture of the paint.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to add some warm highlights on the rocks using a mixture of titanium white, cadmium yellow medium, and burnt sienna. Just looking for the lightest, kind of the lightest portions. And I'm trying to make like brush strokes that are visible and seem like they're applied with intention. This is really cool. You're like almost getting an iridescent effect. You're punching it up with all that saturation.
Yeah.
There's a nice relationship too between the orange and the blue.
Yeah, I stepped back and everything just looked really mid-tone and dull.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's like, well, just punch it up a little bit.
Very cool.
Cool, thanks.
Kind of reinforcing some of the blue-greens in the water using a mixture of titanium white, cadmium yellow medium, and a bit of cobalt teal. Tad and I were just discussing the virtues of you know, applying the paint with intention. I've been trying to do that on this whole painting where, you know, load the brush, make a stroke, load the brush, make a stroke, and not a lot of fussing around. So that's what I'm doing right now in this area here. You got some texture on there. Definitely loaded the brush.
Yeah.
And that color, like I said, like iridescence, the only word that comes to mind. That looks like it was fun to paint too.
It was a lot of fun, yeah. I kind of pulled it out of just something that felt just kind of plain and boring, and then yeah, it just kind of fell into a fun pattern.
All right, so here's the finished product. I will be doing some touch-ups. I noticed when I got home, some of the rocks, like this one right here, is kind of like just a perfect little rectangle. And the top of this rock here is perfectly flat. But overall, I like the color and the arrangement. I was worried about, you know, this not working here, not having a nice sense of depth because of no horizon. But once I added the sky reflections on top of the water, it did seem to recede. I think it also helped to put a wave in the distance, or a couple of waves, to lead the eye out into the distance. And I made sure to tint the white water with a little bit of ultramarine blue, so the value didn't compete with the white water up front. So kind of using atmospheric perspective on these waves here, which pushed them back into the distance. All right, so the canvas I was painting on is a Centurion OPDLX, which I guess means Oil Primed Deluxe, and it's by Centurion. I've painted on other Centurion stretched linen canvases before and didn't like them very much. But they were not oil primed. So I would recommend the oil primed one. I think these are fairly inexpensive for linen, and I'm pretty sure that I got it from Jerry's. I've just had these around for a long time, and just figured I'd give it a try. But it's definitely a nice surface to paint on. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you'd like to see some extra videos and help support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below. Got a bunch of extra videos on there, materials list, that sort of thing. Check it out. Other than that, stay creative, and I'll see you guys in the next video. We've done it. It's a wrap.